What's up, dudes and dudes here? Now, my name's Scyushi, and we're back as more Trove. Very short video today, just announcing the fact that you guys on consoles are finally all caught up to the PC version of the game. Namely, you got two massive updates, which is going to be the Gear Crafters update and the Rising Tide update. So I wanted to kind of go through them very briefly, just to let you guys kind of know what's up with them. If you haven't already checked out my other videos that are in more length and detail, you know, the official patch notes video, so on and so forth. But essentially, the gear crafting is going to end up being over here in the hub area. And what this is going to do is quite literally just be related to gear crafting. So there's the gear crafting table. You can start crafting up gear and slowly earn up your points until you can end up maxing it out. Now, the main resource you're going to struggle with is going to be block element, but keep in mind that you'll get a lot of block element long term. You can get block element from loot collecting gear, which means that the most consistent way of getting block element is going to be out of these new boxes right here, the gear crafter vaults. There's a little more details and nuance to these vaults, but essentially you're going to end up going into U6, which has been renamed. They renamed all the difficulties for no god awful reason, but Forbidden Spires. Forbidden Spires is the biome that has the most elite mobs. And so elite mobs are going to be what drops the Gear Crafter vaults. And the Gear Crafter vaults, depending on your power rank of the class that you're equipped to, will end up giving you various levels of gear, with 45k being the requirement in order to get Crystal 5 gear, but you also have to have the profession completely maxed out. I would say to prioritize, open as many of these boxes as you need to, while farming and loot collecting gear to get the block element to max this profession out as quickly as possible. For a lot of the other resources, you'll just get them out of this guy, including there's these cash shot pay to win keys. If you really want to drain your qubits, these will give you a guaranteed rare drop out of the Gear Crafter vaults, which these do not have good rare drops, so just ignore them. But you can buy these block elements here, which you should do if you can afford it, just because that's 500 free block element per day. And then otherwise, these are all of the molds that are going to be required in order to craft up gear, which I would suggest going for. Like, I think faces and hats are like cheaper, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it costs a little less formicite and various resources for a face than it does for like all the other resources. It's not really that big of a deal. But anyways, max this out as soon as possible at 250 and then don't touch it anymore, because gear crafting is garbage and the consistency of these boxes is just a whole lot better. Now, just to give you guys a little bit of a low end, 20k PR and still a maxed out profession as far as I know. You can get Crystal 4 gear. As far as I've heard from people, 20k PR is the lowest that they've gotten Crystal 4. So you'll be, it's not going to be consistent. It's not going to be common, but at the very least, this is kind of the new meta when it comes to gear farming and just getting your character a lot more powerful. Now, the Gear Crafter's Terminus, this is kind of like a mini skill tree for the gear crafting. And you're probably just going to want this, but it's not mandatory. It's going to require a lot of block elements. So yeah, anyways. The other big thing to keep in mind is when you're crafting gear, whether it be high grade or low grade, there's going to be a chance of getting a tempered block element, which is important because it's going to be resources required in order to forge up Crystal 5 gear. Now, one last thing to mention about the gear crafting is that the gear that you end up getting out of these Gear Crafter vaults will be at 2 stars minimum in their like forge level, which is why these boxes are more consistently better for your resources long term than crafting gear. Because if you craft gear, it's going to be at level 0, which means that you're going to have to put those 2 additional levels, and that's a lot of nitro, especially if you get to Crystal 5. So it's just a lot better to open these boxes, hope that you get a Crystal 5 or something high tier out of it, because at the very least it's going to be 2 stars or 3 stars. The other big aspect of the game is going to be the Rising Tides, which introduces the long shade difficulty. It's not going to be spinning for you if you're not strong enough to enter here, which it does have a requirement of 42.5k PR. Trust me, you're going to need way more than that. You're going to have to be like 45k minimum and have to have like, I think like 11k light or something to even barely be able to solo it. And that's because this area is going to be where you'll get resources for mystic gear. Now, I'm gonna get ahead of myself and talk a little bit about the Mystic gear before we go into the new biomes and 5-star and stuff like that. But essentially, in order to get Mystic gear, you have to have a 5-star piece of gear that you forge into Mystic gear. That is currently the only method of actually obtaining Mystic gear. Long term, we know that it will eventually come out of gear crafting, and the Lunar event right now does actually give us resources for Mystic gear, albeit extremely rare, and I'll get into that in a moment. But I'm just going to say outright, even if you're at the end game, don't bother with Mystic gear. It is atrociously difficult, like requiring hundreds, if not thousands of hours of grinding the same boring thing over and over again to try and get the resources that you need. Now, you can see I've got enough depth cores, but I'm missing a ton of the souls of the depths. So the depth cores are going to be exclusive to the new 5-star dungeons in the Long Shade. Long Shade basically is going to be 3 different biomes that will randomize every 3 hours. All of those biomes can generate the new 5-star dungeon, and the new 5-star dungeon looks the same across the board. You guys can check out my more recent streams to see me farming those dungeons consistently. But either way, that will be where you get the majority of these new resources, excluding the deep stone and lichen stone and other various ores will be exclusive to specific biomes in the Long Shade difficulty. Now, as far as the hardest resource to get in the game right now, which is the Souls of the Depths, these are exclusive to the delves, and the new delve in particular, which is sunken underwater delve. And this thing sucks. It's the worst delve in the game. And it is exactly why barely anybody actually has Mystic gear right now, save for a few people that took advantage of some exploits that are no longer in the game. I'm not saying there isn't like a couple people that probably grinded Mystic gear legit without realizing that they were taking advantage of exploits and stuff like that, because otherwise, yeah, it's ridiculous how difficult it is. Now, the event going on is the Lunar Plunge, which involves you going into the shores of the Everdark. U11 or U12 doesn't matter, but the single 1-star dungeons that are in the Everdark for this event are going to have a very, very, very rare chance of dropping all of these resources for Mystic gear, including Souls of the Depths. Now, granted, I ended up grinding like maybe 100 dungeons, and I think I got 1 Souls of the Depths, maybe none. I don't remember what amount of Souls of the Depths I was at beforehand, but there was somebody else on stream, VG, who was saying he grinded like 150 dungeons and he only got like maybe 1 or 2 Souls of the Depths. Now, you end up getting the other resources, which is nice, and can be a consistently good way of farming for Flux, because what I would recommend that you guys do right now, if you're not busy focusing on Forbidden Spires to get your gear crafting up, go into the Everdark so that you can consistently farm for the various event resources, which ultimately is going to give you a lot of the ore that you can only obtain in the Long Shade. And then once the event is gone, you could sell all of those ores and resources. It's actually pretty cool that this is kind of a way they're funneling these newer resources into the game. But long term, like big picture mode right here, I think that Mystic gear is something that you should not strive to obtain right now, and instead should focus on gaining later down the line. Because if I'm being perfectly honest, my guesstimation is that the Mystic gear is only half baked right now. I think that it is part 1 of many, many chain of events and updates that are going to slowly, systematically make it easier to obtain. And then eventually we already know they're going to have Mystic gear 2, Mystic 3, Mystic 4, Mystic 5. You know, it's just going to be an inevitability. And the devs have also internally been talking about Mystic gems. But that's a whole other topic that we'll end up getting into another time. So hopefully you ended up finding today's video helpful, ladies and gentlemen. If you did, smash like, subscribe, notification bell, all the YouTube buttons. You know how it all is. There's also all of that stuff if you want to check out some of my other stuff. I did end up doing a live stream earlier today, but I'm going to post that video tomorrow just because it's going to take a long time to process. But yeah, I hope that you enjoy the new update, guys.